There's a certain electricity that hums in the air the first time you watch Bruce Lee step into the dusty sunlit streets of Rome. I still remember that sense of tension, half curiosity, half reverence, as if the screen itself was aware it was carrying something larger than just a martial arts film. This wasn't just another Hong Kong export with choreographed punches and formulaic revenge. This was a man trying to speak through his fists, his humor, and his silence. When I first encountered The Way of the Dragon, I felt as though I was being invited into Bruce Lee's mind at the very moment he decided he no longer wanted to be a part of someone else's story. He wanted to write it, film it, perform it, and own it. What's extraordinary about that realization is that it shows on the screen. Every beat of this movie feels like a personal declaration, from its slow rural opening to the polished choreography in the Colosseum. The plot itself is deceptively simple. A Chinese country boy arrives in Rome to help friends whose restaurant is being harassed by gangsters. Yet beneath that thin veneer of genre predictability lies a quiet revolution. For the first time, Bruce Lee is not just a hero performing the fight scenes. He's a storyteller orchestrating the rhythm, tone, and visual poetry of each moment. He is both the dragon and the director, shaping the way East meets West not only in combat but in culture. I think about that often, how the film isn't about domination, but about harmony through understanding. The very setting, Rome, the heart of an empire, echoes with historical irony. Here stands a Chinese hero, a martial philosopher, walking among marble ruins built by conquerors. Yet what he conquers is not territory, but misunderstanding. There's a scene early on where Tang Lung, Bruce Lee's character, sits awkwardly in an Italian restaurant, unsure how to order food, fumbling through cultural differences with a mix of politeness and frustration. It's comic, yes, but it's also a mirror to every immigrant's experience, every outsider's attempt to belong in a world that treats difference as confusion. That moment carries a kind of universal humanity that transcends the kung fu genre entirely. When I revisit this movie today, I see it less as a martial arts flick and more as a cinematic essay, an argument about identity, pride, and art itself. The restaurant that Tang Lung defends becomes a metaphorical embassy for cultural dignity. Each time the gangsters return, each punch he delivers is a sentence, each kick a rebuttal against exploitation and humiliation. Yet, the violence never feels hateful. There's discipline in his motion and compassion in his restraint. Watch closely, and you'll notice that he fights only when forced, almost apologetically, as though violence is simply a language of last resort when reason fails. It's easy to forget now, in the era of big-budget martial arts crossovers, that this was the first time a Chinese filmmaker used Western architecture as a canvas for Eastern philosophy. When Tang Lung faces his ultimate opponent in the Colosseum, the scene doesn't just symbolize two fighters. It symbolizes civilization's meeting in the ruins of past glory. The way the camera lingers on the dust, the sunlight, the silence before the first strike. It's almost reverent. Bruce Lee was choreographing history, not just combat. I find myself strangely moved by how playful a movie can be between all that intensity. The humor is disarming, the pace oddly relaxed compared to later Hong Kong cinema. Lee allows his character to be naive, to make mistakes, to laugh at himself. It's almost as if he wanted to remind his audience that strength isn't just about physical power, but about emotional intelligence, knowing when to smile, when to forgive, and when to defend what you love. There's a warmth in his interactions with the restaurant workers, especially Nora Miao's character, that reveals his belief in community. Beneath the kicks and cracks, there's tenderness. Perhaps that's what makes The Way of the Dragon so enduring. It's balance. It's a film that dances between tones, comedy and tragedy, pride and humility, east and west, without losing rhythm. The rawness of its cinematography gives it an almost documentary honesty. You can feel the texture of Rome's alleys, the unfiltered daylight on Bruce Lee's face. Nothing feels staged for glamour. Everything feels necessary, like a message written in motion. I often think of how this film redefined masculinity. 2. Bruce Lee didn't portray the stoic warrior as emotionless. He portrayed him as deeply feeling, fiercely protective, almost spiritual in his control. His bare chest glistening under the Italian sun became an image of both vulnerability and defiance. He wasn't invincible, he was disciplined. And that distinction has shaped generations of martial artists and actors alike. There's also a personal melancholy running through the film, knowing what would happen just a year later. His sudden death at 32 casts a haunting shadow over every frame. It feels like watching a man immortalize his philosophy in motion before time could silence him. Every movement, every joke, every glare of focus carries an urgency. Remember this, understand this. And we do. Half a century later, we still talk about that final duel in the Colosseum as if it happened yesterday. Because in cinema's collective memory, it did. If I could describe the emotional temperature of The Way of the Dragon, it would be the heat of purpose mixed with the coolness of self-mastery. It invites you to witness a man who's no longer content being a part of cinema. He becomes cinema. The screen ceases to be a barrier. It becomes an extension of his body, his mind, his belief that art should liberate. For me, that's why this movie never grows old. Each viewing feels like sitting across from Bruce Lee himself, listening to him tell you, with that quiet smile, that The Way of the Dragon is not destruction. It's evolution. And maybe that's the beauty of it. It's not about who wins or loses the fight. It's about how one carries oneself in the battle gracefully, intelligently, with humor and integrity. Watching this film now, I see more than martial arts. I see a man teaching the world how to express the soul through discipline. And in that sense, he never left the screen. He simply became one with the movement, forever in motion. There's a strange charm in the way the first half unfolds. It's both awkwardly humorous and quietly mythic, like watching a folk hero step out of a village legend into modern chaos. Tang Lung's arrival in Rome is clumsy, innocent, and full of wonder. He's dressed in plain Chinese clothes, moving through a world that doesn't seem to understand him. The film lingers on confusion at airports, his discomfort with Western etiquette, and his small but genuine gestures of politeness. This entire setup isn't just for laughs. It's Bruce Lee showing us the dissonance between East and West, the tenderness of tradition colliding with the arrogance of modernity. When Tang finally reaches a Chinese restaurant, he's met with both relief and skepticism. The staff, who expected a fierce protector, are disappointed by his modest appearance. It's a clever piece of writing because it exposes the biases of even his own people. They've internalized Western expectations of what a hero should look like. But Tang Lung's calm smile says otherwise. There's a quiet assurance that doesn't need words. That's the film's first major theme emerging. Strength as presence, not performance. The restaurant itself becomes a miniature world of cultural friction. You can almost feel the unease among the workers as they try to survive in a foreign land, caught between exploitation and hope. The gangsters who harass them are not merely villains. They're embodiments of the Western system of intimidation that preys on immigrants' insecurity. Each scene in that little restaurant feels charged, as if the walls themselves are witnesses to a slow-burning resistance. Then comes the first taste of conflict. The gangsters show up to intimidate, and Tang Lung watches silently at first. The others are nervous, and Bruce Lee plays it perfectly. His expression moves from bewildered politeness to a sharp, almost serene realization. It's time. The moment he steps forward and fights for the first time, the film transforms. The rhythm of his movement, precise, contained, and lightning fast, redefines what martial arts on film could be. The sound design shifts from chatter to impact, from fear to awe. It's as though Rome has been temporarily forced to listen to a new kind of language, the language of disciplined motion. After that fight, there's a shift in tone. Suddenly, everyone begins to respect him, but he doesn't bask in it. Tang Lung returns to his meal calmly, wiping his hands as though nothing special happened. That's Bruce Lee's genius as both actor and director. He knows the power of understatement. His character is a man who doesn't need applause, and the silence after his victories feels like a meditation. The middle part of the first half then builds through cycles of confrontation and comic relief. One moment, he's teaching the restaurant staff how to defend themselves with simple, effective moves, making us laugh at their clumsy attempts while also inspiring us with the beauty of simplicity. The next, he's wandering through Roman streets, his curiosity blooming like a child's. There's a particularly funny scene involving him misunderstanding local customs and struggling to communicate with Italian shopkeepers. These small moments serve an important purpose. They make the audience love him before he becomes a legend. He's human first, hero later. One of the cleverest creative choices is how Bruce Lee contrasts Tang Lung's purity with the cynicism of those around him. The restaurant owners and workers are tired, scared, almost broken. They've lost faith in fairness. Tang becomes their mirror, a reminder that dignity isn't given by society but preserved within oneself. When he stands up to the mobsters, he isn't just protecting them physically, he's resurrecting their self-respect. As the pressure escalates, the villains hire tougher fighters. One by one, Tang defeats them, each battle more symbolic than the last. The choreography in these early fights feels like poetry. Every strike tells a story. The wide stances echo tradition, the explosive speed announces innovation, and the camera lingers just enough to let the movement breathe. You can sense Bruce Lee experimenting with how film can feel a fight instead of just showing it. Then there's the subtle thread of romance that glimmers quietly in the background. The chemistry between Tang and Hwang, played by Nora Miao, isn't overt. It's delicate, respectful, filled with glances rather than words. She becomes his bridge between worlds, translating his foreignness into something relatable. Their scenes together soften the film's edges and remind us that behind every warrior lies a heart trying to find connection. What fascinates me most in this first half is how Bruce Lee structures rhythm. The movie breathes. It alternates between chaos and calm, laughter and tension. You feel like you're being carried through philosophy rather than just a plot. The pacing isn't accidental. It mirrors martial discipline. The inhale before strike, the silence before storm. The turning point of the first half arrives when Tang realizes the depth of corruption surrounding the restaurant's predicament. The gangsters aren't just thugs. They have influence, money, and backing. Rome, with its beautiful ruins and polite exteriors, hides a machinery of control not unlike the systems that once oppressed Lee's own culture. In this realization, Tang Lung stops being a visitor. He becomes an intruder in a world that underestimated him. The cinematography during this transition subtly darkens. Streets become narrower, compositions tighter, and shadows start creeping in around Tang's silhouette. You can feel the weight of destiny gathering, but Bruce Lee resists melodrama. Instead, he gives us small, human gestures, Tang quietly helping a child, sharing a laugh, or training late at night alone. Each of these moments is a stroke in a larger portrait of purpose. By the end of the first half, the balance between comedy and conflict has tilted towards seriousness. The laughter fades. The threats grow more sinister. The restaurant workers who once looked to Tang for help now depend on him for survival. What began as a personal favor becomes a moral duty. And you sense that Bruce Lee is not merely playing a character anymore. He's embodying the struggle of his entire cultural identity on foreign soil. When the screen fades to the midpoint, you don't just want to see who wins the next fight. You want to see whether this man, standing between two civilizations, can make them understand each other without losing himself. That's the real tension, the battle between self and assimilation, between humility and assertion. And that, I think, is why the first half of The Way of the Dragon feels so alive. It's not just building toward a showdown. It's awakening a philosophy in motion. The second half of the story begins where humor fades and the weight of the fight truly begins to settle on Tang Lung's shoulders. What was once a playful clash between a naive visitor and petty gangsters starts turning into a chess game of willpower, identity, and survival. The gangsters, humiliated by their repeated defeats, escalate their response. They bring in professionals, mercenaries from abroad, and with them, the tone of the film sharpens into a slow, disciplined rhythm of rising tension. There's a chilling quietness in the way these later scenes are filmed. Gone are the earlier bursts of laughter or the innocence of cultural misunderstanding. Now, every step Tang takes through Rome feels measured, cautious, prophetic. Bruce Lee begins to use space differently. The wide streets and open courtyards that once symbolized freedom now seem to close in, walls and corridors narrowing like a predator's trap. The subtle shift in geography mirrors Tang Lung's inner world. He's still composed, but the innocence that once cushioned his demeanor has hardened into awareness. The gangsters' new strategy is psychological. They attack not only the restaurant but the people around him, trying to isolate Tang, to make him doubt his place in this foreign land. It's remarkable how Bruce Lee, without heavy dialogue, conveys his emotional transformation purely through posture and silence. His eyes, once wide with curiosity, now burn with quiet focus. It's the evolution of the martial artist into a philosopher warrior, someone who understands that true strength means bearing solitude with grace. When the gangsters send multiple hired fighters after him, each confrontation feels like a fable. There's a fight in an alleyway where Tang faces two opponents at once. His movement precise, economical, but never brutal. He dismantles their aggression with fluid efficiency, almost as though he's teaching them a lesson in balance rather than punishing them. The choreography isn't just about winning. It's about demonstrating a worldview. Every block and counter seems to whisper, "Control yourself, and you control the world." This half of the film also reveals Bruce Lee's genius as a director. The camera lingers more deliberately, cutting less frequently than in other action films of the era. He wanted the audience to see the rhythm of combat, to feel the tension in real time rather than through editing tricks. That's why his duels feel alive. They breathe. You can sense the heartbeat of the fight, the pauses, the breath between motions. And the sound design, the echo of footsteps, the dry Roman air, the distant hum of traffic, grounds in reality. As the plot unfolds, Tang Lung becomes increasingly isolated. The restaurant staff begin to fear the escalating violence, and even those who once admired him grow uncertain. There's a beautiful melancholy in this stretch of the movie, where Lee lets silence do most of the storytelling. Tang eats alone, trains alone, and begins to resemble a monk in exile. This solitude becomes a crucible through which his philosophy crystallizes. That peace is not the absence of conflict, but the mastery of it. Then comes the most legendary sequence, the fight in the Roman Colosseum between Tang Lung and Colt, played by Chuck Norris. Few scenes in martial arts cinema are as mythic or as layered as this one. On the surface, it's a duel between two masters, East versus West. But look closer and you'll see something spiritual unfolding. The Colosseum, once a stage for gladiators and imperial spectacle, now hosts two men fighting not for audience applause, but for personal truth. The choreography of this battle is a dialogue. At first, Tang struggles to adapt to Colt's raw power and rigid form. The camera captures every misstep, every failed strike, as if exposing Tang's vulnerabilities. Yet, slowly he begins to shift, his movements loosen, his breathing deepens, his style becomes more fluid. It's a literal visualization of his be-like-water philosophy taking shape mid-fight. The way he tilts his head, studies Colt's stance, and starts countering with graceful unpredictability. This is Bruce Lee turning philosophy into cinema. One of the most haunting details is the moment after the fight ends. Tang kills Colt not out of rage, but out of necessity, and then, unlike the victors of old Rome, he kneels beside his fallen opponent, covers his body with his GI, and bows in respect. That single gesture redefines the concept of victory. It's no longer about domination, but about understanding that strength without compassion is hollow. In that silent bow, Bruce Lee pays respect to his adversary, to martial tradition, and to the idea that even conflict can carry honor. After the Colosseum fight, there's a noticeable emotional stillness in the film. The climax doesn't end with cheers or triumphant music. Instead, Bruce Lee chooses reflection. Tang returns to his friends, but something in him and in us has changed. The once clumsy traveler who arrived in Rome now walks with a calm, knowing stride. He's not returning home as a conqueror, but as someone who's fulfilled his purpose, to teach, to awaken, to balance. The final scenes fade into quiet humility. The restaurant is safe, the people are free, yet Tang doesn't linger for celebration. He simply leaves, walking away from the camera, back into anonymity. It's as if the dragon has completed its cycle, disappearing into mist after delivering its message. And that's what gives the ending its poetic power. The hero doesn't need validation because the journey was never about fame. It was about truth through discipline, peace through mastery, selfhood through self-control. Looking at the entire second half, what strikes me most is its restraint. Bruce Lee resists every temptation to sensationalize the story. The movie could easily have turned into a blood-soaked revenge fantasy, but he keeps it grounded in philosophy. The fights serve the narrative, not the other way around. Even the victory feels contemplative rather than explosive. The pacing slows as if to give the audience time to think, to breathe, to internalize. In many ways, The Way of the Dragon ends not with an exclamation, but with an ellipsis. The quiet Roman streets, the fading echo of footsteps, and the distant hum of life continue as if nothing monumental has occurred. Yet we know something has. A cultural bridge has been built, not through speeches or treaties, but through motion, respect, and the universal rhythm of the human spirit. That's the genius of Bruce Lee's storytelling. He doesn't just show us how to win a fight. He shows us how to walk away from one with grace. The film concludes like a piece of philosophy set in motion, a reminder that the real battle is not with others, but with oneself. And in that quiet realization, the dragon finally finds peace. What fascinates me most about the characters in this story is how they are all, in their own way, trapped between two worlds. Tang Lung, of course, stands at the center of this tension, a man who embodies ancient discipline in a modern, indifferent landscape. Yet the supporting characters orbit around him with their own small but telling arcs, each one reflecting a different response to displacement, fear, and belonging. Bruce Lee, as both actor and director, doesn't simply build caricatures around his hero. He builds mirrors. Every character, from the gentle restaurant workers to the arrogant Western villains, reveals a facet of Tang's inner struggle. Tang Lung's characterization is deceptively simple on the surface. The polite country boy, the naive traveler, the reluctant fighter. But beneath that simplicity is something profound, a study in self-mastery. He rarely speaks, yet every gesture is deliberate. His calmness in the face of insult, his patience with mockery, his humor in confusion. They all weave a portrait of a man whose strength doesn't need to announce itself. What Bruce Lee achieves here is an inversion of the Western hero archetype. Instead of swagger and arrogance, Tang's power comes from humility. He listens before he strikes. He observes before he reacts. Watching him, one begins to understand that for Bruce Lee, martial arts wasn't just combat. It was a moral philosophy in motion. Then there's Cheung, played by Nora Miao, who serves as the emotional core of the narrative. She is not just a damsel with a passive love interest. She's the interpreter, the mediator between Tang and the world of Rome. Through her, we see the tender side of Tang Lung, his moments of vulnerability and human connection. There's a quiet intimacy in their scenes together. The way she looks at him when he doesn't understand the menu, the way she laughs gently at his earnestness. She represents compassion in a world of confrontation, and her presence softens the film's sharp edges. You get the feeling that she understands the loneliness behind his discipline, that her kindness is a form of grounding for him. Among the restaurant staff, each character brings a note of realism to the symphony of cultural tension. They are workers, immigrants, survivors, people who have traded home for survival and familiarity for uncertainty. Their fears and frustrations make the story relatable. They want safety, not glory. Their hesitation to fight isn't cowardice, it's exhaustion. When Tang Lung begins teaching them self-defense, the transformation is both comic and inspiring. Their clumsiness makes us laugh, but their eventual confidence moves us. It's not just about fighting off thugs. It's about reclaiming agency in a foreign world that constantly tells them to stay small. On the other end of the spectrum are the antagonists. The gangsters in The Way of the Dragon are not deep in psychology, but they are deeply symbolic. They represent systems of control, the colonizing impulse, the corruption of power, the arrogance of entitlement. Bruce Lee stages their interactions with Tang as ideological contrasts more than personal vendettas. The Western villains, especially the final opponent, Colt, embody brute strength without spiritual grounding. They are efficient, trained, but hollow. The beauty of Bruce Lee's storytelling is that he doesn't demonize them. He educates them through defeat. When Tang covers Colt's body after killing him, it's not pity, it's enlightenment. It's as if he's saying, "Now you understand." Colt, played by Norris, deserves particular attention because his character transcends the role of a mere villain. He's the only opponent treated with dignity and equality. There's respect between them even before the fight begins, a mutual recognition of mastery. That's why their duel feels almost ceremonial. Colt is the embodiment of Western martial tradition, powerful, rigid, and proud. Tang, fluid and adaptive, represents the Eastern ideal. Their battle becomes an exchange rather than a clash. The moment when Tang studies Colt's movements and begins to change his rhythm is not just physical adaptation. It's philosophical evolution. This single encounter defines both characters, one trapped in structure, the other liberated by flow. The gang leaders who command these fights, on the other hand, are small men with large egos. They symbolize the shallow materialism that Bruce Lee detested. They believe in control through money and muscle, never realizing that they are outmatched by someone who seeks neither. Their cowardice stands in perfect contrast to Tang Lung's moral strength. Watching them manipulate others while avoiding direct confrontation reveals how Lee viewed corruption, not as overt evil, but as spiritual decay. Even the minor characters in the film serve a purpose. The Italian girl who flirts with Tang becomes a brief window into how Bruce Lee viewed sexuality and identity. Her interest in him is superficial, exoticizing, almost comedic, while Tang's reaction is awkward, innocent, and principled. He refuses to be consumed by desire or flattery. It's a quiet statement about self-control and respect. In another scene, the restaurant workers gossip and argue among themselves about whether to stand up or give up, reflecting the broader moral dilemma of oppressed people everywhere. What's interesting about The Way of the Dragon is that no one is written as truly evil or purely good. Every character is shaped by their environment, cultural misunderstandings, fear of failure, or misplaced pride. Bruce Lee's genius lies in how he uses these characters to express competing philosophies of life. The gangster's arrogance exposes the emptiness of domination. The worker's fear shows the pain of powerlessness. And Tang Lung's discipline shows a harmony between confidence and compassion. The entire film becomes a dialogue between these energies. By the end, each character has evolved in small but meaningful ways. The workers find courage. Cheung finds clarity. The villains face consequences that reflect their own emptiness. And Tang Lung, ever calm, ever composed, remains the still center of the storm. His growth is internal. He doesn't end the movie with triumph or romance. He ends it with serenity. That's what makes him so unforgettable. He walks away not as a savior, but as a teacher who has finished his lesson. What stays with me long after credits roll isn't just Bruce Lee's unmatched presence, but the humanity with which he shaped everyone around him, in his hands. Even side characters become fragments of a larger soul, each one reflecting our own contradictions, our fear of failure, our longing for purpose. The film isn't crowded with personalities. It's illuminated by them, and through each of them, we glimpse what Bruce Lee wanted cinema to be. Not a spectacle of power, but a meditation on what it means to live with honor in a world that constantly tests it. When I think about the strangest and most fascinating facts around this film, I realize that every detail, on screen and behind it, feels charged with the same raw purpose Bruce Lee carried throughout his short life. One of the most remarkable truths about The Way of the Dragon is that it wasn't just another movie for him. It was his experiment, his rebellion, and his manifesto disguised as entertainment. Bruce wrote, directed, produced, choreographed, and starred in it. That kind of complete creative control was practically unheard of for an Asian filmmaker in the early 70s, especially in international cinema. He wasn't only acting, he was proving a point that an Eastern artist could define his own mythology rather than be cast into someone else's. A lesser-known fact is that this was the first Hong Kong film ever shot in Europe. It may sound trivial today, but back then, that meant bringing an entire production across continents without the logistical comfort or budgets that modern film crews enjoy. Imagine the challenge: limited permits, language barriers, and minimal infrastructure for Asian cinema in Rome. Yet Bruce Lee turned these obstacles into creative energy. The Italian setting didn't just serve as a backdrop. It became a philosophical stage, East meeting West in the ruins of an empire. There's also the intriguing story behind the Colosseum fight scene. Contrary to popular belief, much of it wasn't actually filmed inside the Colosseum. The authorities denied full access, so the production team shot exterior establishing shots on location and recreated the rest of the arena in Hong Kong studios. The illusion is flawless. The dusty air, the ambient silence, the golden hue of the light, all of it feels authentic. It's poetic that Bruce Lee denied the actual ruins of an empire, built his own. Symbolically, that mirrors the entire purpose of the film. When the world won't give you space, you create it yourself. And then there's Chuck Norris. His casting was a masterstroke. At the time, Norris was still relatively unknown, but Bruce saw something in him, a physicality, a seriousness that could elevate the fight from spectacle to dialogue. Off-screen, the two men respected each other deeply. They trained together, debated martial philosophy, and designed the fight sequence collaboratively. That's why their duel feels so alive. It's not two actors pretending, but two masters communicating through motion. Chuck Norris himself later said that Bruce insisted on reshooting portions of the fight until every strike and counter conveyed meaning. What we see is not choreography. It's a physical essay on adaptability versus rigidity. Another curious fact lies in the tone of the movie's humor. The light-hearted moments, the misunderstanding at the restaurant, Tang Lung's confusion with Western customs were all intentional subversions of the Hollywood stereotype of the mystical Asian warrior. Bruce wanted to humanize his hero, to show that strength doesn't erase awkwardness. He reportedly told his cast that Tang Lung's clumsiness was a reflection of his own early experiences in America. In that sense, the film doubles as an autobiography, wrapped in kung fu and comedy. Even the weapon scenes carry secrets. The iconic double nunchaku duel was shot under pressure because Italian authorities were becoming increasingly strict about public weapon displays. Lee rehearsed the sequence in secret, sometimes using broom handles in hotel rooms. The precision we see on screen, the effortless transitions to casual grace, came from his personal obsession with perfection. He used to say that perfection is not a state, it's a process, and this film was his living proof of that belief. One lesser-known behind-the-scenes story is about how the Roman extras reacted during filming. In scenes where Bruce Lee performed live demonstrations to direct the crew, bystanders gathered around and applauded as though watching a real street performance. They didn't understand the language, but they understood the rhythm of authenticity. Some locals even tried to approach him afterward, convinced he was a genuine fighter rather than an actor. It's one of those rare moments when reality and fiction dissolve into each other. Another strange but meaningful fact is the film's original title. Bruce initially wanted to name it Enter the Dragon, but the studio suggested changing it to avoid confusion with his next project. Ironically, that later title became the most iconic martial arts film name in history. Yet, there's a poetic symmetry in how both titles reflect two stages of the same idea. The Way of the Dragon shows the formation of the dragon spirit, while Enter the Dragon shows its arrival in the world. One cannot overlook how the film quietly critiques Western arrogance through subtle gestures. The restaurant staff dependence on external authority, the tourist's dismissive stares, even the gangster's disbelief that a small Chinese man could stand against them. All of these were deliberate reflections of Bruce's real-world experiences in Hollywood, where he was typecast and sidelined. This wasn't just entertainment. It was vindication. And then there's the haunting irony of Bruce Lee's own body. During filming, he was already pushing his physical limits, training obsessively, experimenting with nutrition and energy balance long before fitness culture existed. He believed the body was both weapon and temple. Some crew members later recalled how he would test his heart rate before takes, maintaining extraordinary control over his physiology. Watching him in the Coliseum fight now, knowing he died less than a year later, feels like witnessing a man transcend mortality through movement. There's even a story about the film's music that adds another layer of fascination. The score, composed by Joseph Koo, combines Western orchestral elements with Chinese melodies, a sonic representation of Bruce's vision. In the Coliseum scene, there is no background music at all, only wind and breathing. That silence wasn't accidental. Bruce wanted the fight to feel sacred, to let every sound of movement become music. In doing so, he turned combat into a kind of cinematic haiku, short, intense, and profoundly human. Finally, one of the strangest facts is how the movie's legacy kept evolving. Decades later, it became the first martial arts film added to several European academic film curriculums, not for its action, but for its intercultural symbolism. Scholars study it as a commentary on identity and power, while filmmakers cite it as a turning point in global action cinema. Bruce Lee, unknowingly, had created more than a movie. He had created a mirror where East and West would finally see each other not as rivals, but as reflections. That's why even the strangest production stories feel almost faded. From improvised sets to cultural misunderstandings, everything that could have gone wrong somehow went right. Because Bruce Lee's willpower transformed chaos into coherence. Every punch, every line, every misstep is now part of the mythology. And in that mythology, The Way of the Dragon remains not just a film, but an immortal pulse of human spirit disguised as cinema. Few films have generated as much critical discussion as this one, because it sits at the crossroads of so many ideas, cinematic, political, philosophical, and cultural. Over the years, critics and historians have viewed The Way of the Dragon through multiple lenses, as a martial arts classic, a cross-cultural allegory, and a deeply personal statement from a man confronting the limitations of both East and West. What's fascinating is that nearly every interpretation agrees on one thing. This film marked the moment Bruce Lee transformed from actor to auteur, from performer to philosopher. At the time of its release in 1972, most Western critics saw it only as a violent curiosity. The kung fu boom had not yet taken hold, and reviewers often misunderstood its humor and pacing. They couldn't grasp why a fight film would spend so much time on food, manners, or awkward interactions in a restaurant. Yet decades later, those same scenes are celebrated as subtle explorations of cultural identity. What early critics missed was the intentional rhythm. Bruce Lee wasn't simply setting up action. He was setting up empathy. The film's first half teaches us to see Tang Lung as a human being before we ever see him as a fighter. Eastern critics, however, recognize the deeper message immediately. In Hong Kong and across Asia, the movie was hailed as an act of cultural reclamation. Here was a Chinese hero standing tall in the Western world, not as a caricature or sidekick, but as a teacher. The film's balance of humility and confidence spoke directly to audiences emerging from colonial histories. Tang Lung's victories were symbolic. They suggested that Chinese values of discipline, balance, and respect could coexist with modernity without submission. It was cinema as self-assertion. Modern scholars have gone even further, reading the film as a metaphor for globalization itself. They note that Bruce Lee's Rome is not just a setting. It's a stage where ancient and modern powers collide. The Colosseum, once the center of empire, becomes a sacred space where the new East meets the Old West. The duel between Tang and Colt can be read as more than a fight between martial artists. It's a dialogue between philosophies. Colt represents control, rigidity, and domination. Tang represents adaptability, mindfulness, and flow. The silence of their confrontation, the absence of music, the echo of footsteps, turns combat into conversation. Critics have also connected this film to Bruce Lee's broader intellectual project. He was deeply influenced by Taoism and Western existentialism, and the movie reflects both. The Way of the Dragon isn't just physical mastery. It's a metaphor for self-realization through balance. Some have called it cinematic Taoism, the art of harmony through contrast. Every visual element mirrors this. The chaotic streets of Rome balance the quiet discipline of Tang's movements. The comedic early scenes balance the solemn beauty of the Colosseum fight. Even the color palette, earthy tones against cold stone, echoes the yin-yang dynamic of stillness and motion. Later critics began situating The Way of the Dragon within post-colonial theory. They noted how Bruce Lee reverses the Western gaze. In most Hollywood films of the time, Asian characters existed to serve or amuse the Western hero. Here, the camera belongs to the outsider. Rome, usually filmed as a symbol of grandeur, becomes an alien landscape, almost claustrophobic, through Tang's eyes. The perspective is inverted. The empire is no longer the center of the story. That inversion remains one of the most powerful aspects of Lee's direction, subtle yet revolutionary. Even within film studies, the movie occupies a unique place because it blurs genre boundaries. It's part comedy, part action, part cultural essay. Some critics compare it to Italian neorealism for its natural lighting and unpolished textures, while others see it as early martial arts modernism, using stylized motion to express inner truth. The mix is deliberate. Bruce Lee was dismantling cinematic expectations in the same way he dismantled martial forms. Just as he rejected rigid styles in fighting, be water, my friend, he rejected rigid genres in storytelling. Another recurring theme in critical discussion is the film's spiritual melancholy. Because Bruce Lee died soon after, viewers can't help but read prophetic meaning into it. The image of him walking away alone through Rome's sun-bleached ruins feels almost mythic, as if he knew he was crafting his own farewell. Some critics argue that his departure in the final shot represents transcendence, the dragon returning to the heavens after completing its earthly purpose. Others see it as tragedy, a symbol of eternal exile. Either way, it haunts the viewer. Film historians also highlight how the Way of the Dragon reshaped global cinema economics. It proved that an Asian-made film could succeed internationally without Western mediation. That success changed everything, from the rise of Golden Harvest Studios to Hollywood's eventual embrace of martial arts choreography. The movie didn't just bridge cultures, it built an industry. In academic circles, discussions often center on Bruce Lee's identity as a hybrid figure. Born in San Francisco, raised in Hong Kong, educated in America, he was neither wholly East nor West, and that duality pulses through film. Tang Lung's awkwardness abroad mirrors Bruce's own navigation of multiple worlds. Critics call it diasporic authorship, a filmmaker using art to reconcile divided identities. That's why even simple moments, like Tang teaches friends to defend themselves, resonate beyond plot. They echo the universal desire to belong without losing oneself. Over time, the movie's reputation has only grown. Modern critics describe it as intimate and meditative, far more personal than its successors. It lacks the studio polish of Enter the Dragon, but that rawness is its power. It feels handmade, honest, almost journal-like. The imperfections, the uneven dubbing, the abrupt edits become part of its texture, reminders that art doesn't need perfection to achieve immortality. Perhaps the most beautiful critical interpretation comes from those who see the film not as a cultural argument, but as a love letter to motion, to cinema, to humanity itself. The way Bruce Lee frames bodies in motion, poised, balanced, alive, feels less like violence and more like choreography of existence. Every punch is a question, every block a response. Critics call it kinetic philosophy, the idea that truth can be expressed through movement as deeply as through words. In the end, all these perspectives converge on one point. The Way of the Dragon was never just about fighting. It was about awakening. It was Bruce Lee's cinematic meditation on what it means to be fully alive, to move through a divided world with grace and precision. And that's why, half a century later, critics don't just review it. They return to it, like students revisiting a master's lesson, discovering new truths hidden in the rhythm of his motion. One of the most rewarding aspects of learning about this film's production is discovering how much it was driven by improvisation, courage, and Bruce Lee's obsessive craftsmanship. There was no massive studio machine behind him, no Hollywood comfort zone, just vision, grit, and a small team that believed in his ability to make something timeless. What emerged was a movie that feels both intimate and monumental, the kind of work that can only be created when a single mind takes full ownership of every creative decision. During production, Bruce Lee essentially became a one-man army. He wrote the script in English, then translated and adapted it for the Hong Kong crew while on set. He designed the fight choreography daily, tailoring it to the unique strengths of each performer rather than forcing uniformity. The story goes that he would rehearse scenes late into the night, often refilming minor exchanges until the timing and rhythm felt alive. He believed that the camera should dance with the fighters, not merely record them. That's why his framing feels kinetic but never chaotic. Each movement has an emotional pulse that ties directly to character. One production fact that never ceases to amaze me is how modest the budget was. The Way of the Dragon cost a fraction of what Western action films of the time required, yet Bruce achieved cinematic textures that rivaled much larger productions. The restaurant interior was an actual location in Rome, not a set. The kitchen and back rooms were cramped, yet Bruce used the claustrophobia to his advantage, choreographing fights that showcased Tang Lung's adaptability. By using natural lighting and handheld cameras, he gave the film a gritty authenticity that would later influence directors like John Woo and Quentin Tarantino. Even sound design became a site of innovation. Because of budget constraints, much of the audio had to be added later, and Bruce oversaw the mixing personally. The distinct whip-crack sound of his strikes was created by layering bamboo whip noises with subtle wind whooshes, primitive by today's standards, but iconic in effect. That sharp, cutting rhythm became part of his cinematic signature, copied endlessly by future martial arts movies. Another fascinating piece of trivia lies in the film's international collaboration. Bruce brought together actors from Hong Kong, Italy, and America, making the set a multilingual microcosm of the story itself. Communication wasn't easy, but he turned the chaos into a kind of creative energy. According to crew accounts, Bruce's charisma dissolved barriers. Everyone, from Italian extras to Hong Kong camera operators, spoke the common language of respect. When the production struggled with local regulations, Bruce personally negotiated with Roman officials, impressing them with his charm and discipline. His meticulous attention extended even to costumes. The now legendary yellow nunchaku and sleeveless outfit were not random choices. They were designed to maximize visibility and symbolism. The bright tones of his clothing contrasted against Rome's stone backdrops, emphasizing the theme of individuality amid conformity. Every visual detail carried meaning. The simplicity of his attire versus the ornate European architecture symbolized a purity of spirit, confronting the decadence of power. There were also real physical stakes. Bruce insisted on performing his own stunts, refusing doubles even for risky sequences. The climatic fight with Chuck Norris was particularly brutal. Both actors sustained bruises, and one of Norris's ribs was reportedly injured during rehearsal, but neither complained. Bruce viewed pain as a kind of honesty. It made the movements real. He would often quote an idea from Chinese philosophy: "Through hardship comes clarity." It's no wonder the final product feels so visceral. Because it was. The editing process reveals another side of his perfectionism. Dissatisfied with conventional editing rhythms, Bruce personally sat with the editor to synchronize cuts with the tempo of breath, not just music. He used silence strategically, removing background scores where Western films will rely on orchestration. The absence of music in key fights wasn't oversight. It was meditation through tension. Viewers could feel every exhale, every footstep, every shift in air pressure. It's a detail most audiences don't consciously notice, yet it changes how the fights resonate emotionally. An underappreciated production insight involves Bruce's directorial innovations in camera perspective. He broke away from the tradition of static, wide-angle kung fu framing and introduced dynamic positioning, close-ups, low angles, over-the-shoulder viewpoints that placed the audience inside the fight. It was revolutionary. Western directors later borrowed this style, leading to more immersive choreography we see in modern cinema. What he was doing instinctively in 1972 became an industry standard. Even his leadership style left an impression. Colleagues described him as intense but inspiring, balancing strict discipline with contagious enthusiasm. He treated filmmaking like martial arts training, demanding precision but rewarding authenticity. Crew members remember him demonstrating kicks between takes, teaching philosophy as much as technique. To them, working on a film was less like employment and more like apprenticeship under a master. Then there were the fun facts that make this production human. Bruce reportedly loved spaghetti and used filming breaks to explore Roman food culture. He joked about Tang Lung's first restaurant scene being too real, since he too had struggled ordering food abroad. He also made a rule that after each major shoot, the entire crew would share a meal together, no matter how tired they were. He wanted the film to carry that same communal spirit. Perhaps the most beautiful production insight comes from the way Bruce envisioned movement as storytelling. To him, choreography wasn't about dominance. It was about communication. Each sequence had to express emotion, fear, respect, humor, or revelation. In that sense, every fight was a conversation, every kick a word, every silence a pause between thoughts. The Colosseum duel remains the ultimate example of this philosophy. Two men expressing everything they believe without saying a single line. Looking back, what makes a production of The Way of the Dragon so extraordinary isn't just its technical innovation, but its purity of purpose. It was born out of necessity, crafted with integrity, and executed with relentless willpower. Bruce Lee wasn't following the rules of filmmaking. He was writing new ones in real time. And though the camera stopped rolling decades ago, the discipline, humility, and creative daring that powered this production still echo in every modern martial arts film that dares to tell a story with its soul, not just its fists. When I think about the setting of this film, I'm struck by how deliberately Bruce Lee used space, not merely as backdrop, but as metaphor. Every location feels alive with meaning. Rome is more than a city here. It's a psychological terrain where civilizations collide. Its streets, alleys, and ancient ruins become stages on which East and West form their silent negotiations of power, pride, and understanding. What fascinates me most is how Bruce transforms these real spaces into inner landscapes of discipline, identity, and awakening. The movie opens with Tang Lung arriving in Rome, and right away the setting disorients him. The bright European architecture, the clatter of traffic, the endless chatter of strangers. It's overwhelming. Bruce films these early moments with wide, open shots that emphasize Tang's smallness in a vast foreign space. You feel his isolation before he says a word. Yet the sunlight, the warmth, and the openness also carry a sense of potential. Rome becomes both intimidating and inviting, a world that challenges but also offers new lessons. Then we step into the restaurant, which serves as the movie's beating heart. It's small, cluttered, and constantly threatened by the outside world, almost like a fortress of identity in hostile territory. The kitchen scenes, steam rising from pots, the clang of utensils, the laughter and frustration of workers, are filled with texture. They represent the immigrant's daily rhythm, a blend of nostalgia and struggle. Bruce shoots it not as a mere location, but as a living symbol of community under siege. Each time Tang Lung defends his place, it feels as though he's defending not just friends, but the very idea of belonging. What's particularly masterful is how Bruce contrasts enclosed spaces with open ones. The restaurant scenes feel intimate and safe, but the street confrontations explode into wide Roman squares or abandoned courtyards where Tang's movements echo against ancient stone. Those juxtapositions, confined interiors versus sprawling exteriors, mirror Tang's evolution from confusion to clarity. Early on, he hides behind walls, unsure. By the end, he stands centered in open spaces, fully in command. It's as if Rome itself has become his dojo. The cinematography carries this symbolism beautifully. Bruce collaborated closely with cinematographer Tadashi Nishimoto to craft a visual language where lighting expresses emotion. The warm yellows and reds of Rome contrast with Tang Lung's cool-toned clothing, simple blues, whites, and grays, highlighting his otherness. Shadows grow deeper as the plot darkens, and by the time we reach the Colosseum, the palette becomes almost monochrome. Stone, skin, and sunlight. That final duel plays out like an ancient fresco come alive, minimal, mythic, eternal. The Colosseum itself is perhaps the film's greatest symbolic space. Though much of it was reconstructed in Hong Kong studios, Bruce ensures it feels sacred, not merely cinematic. There are no crowds, no noise, just two men, the ruins, and the wind. The choice to set the climactic battle in the cradle of Western civilization is deliberate. This ancient arena, once the site of imperial spectacle, becomes a temple of philosophy. The contrast is powerful, a symbol of past brutality now hosting an act of disciplined grace. Tang Lung's presence there reclaims the idea of combat from entertainment back to enlightenment. Even smaller settings tell stories. The narrow alleys, the abandoned warehouses, the simple apartments, all carry the weight of realism. Bruce's direction has an almost documentary intimacy. You can hear the echoes of footsteps, the hum of everyday life around the characters. He doesn't glorify Rome. He humanizes it. The city isn't exoticized. It's shown as a living, breathing organism that tests Tang's adaptability. What's often overlooked is how sound complements these visuals. The background noise of markets, the chirping of birds, and distant church bells blend with Joseph Koo's sparse score to evoke cultural contrast. In quieter scenes, Bruce strips the soundtrack entirely, allowing the setting's natural acoustics to guide the emotion. The result is an atmosphere that feels tactile. You don't just watch the city, you inhabit it. Lighting also plays a quiet but critical role in storytelling. Early sequences are bathed in open daylight, representing innocence and unfamiliarity. Midway through, as threats intensify, shadows lengthen and artificial light intrudes. Neon reflections on wet streets, the flicker of lamps in dark corridors. Finally, during the Colosseum fight, natural sunlight returns, pure and undiluted. The symbolic journey moves from confusion to clarity, from artificiality to truth. Even costume design integrates into this environment. Tang Lung's plain attire feels almost ascetic compared to the tailored suits of the mobsters. It's simplicity against decadence, discipline against vanity. When he fights, his plain clothing moves fluidly against the harsh textures of marble and cobblestone, another visual metaphor for adaptability conquering rigidity. Bruce also uses framing to shape our emotional connection to the setting. He often positions Tang Lung slightly off-center in early shots, reflecting his discomfort. As the story progresses, Tang becomes perfectly centered in the frame, his posture aligned with the symmetry of Roman architecture. By the final scene, he stands balanced against the circular geometry of the Colosseum, completing his visual and spiritual alignment. Perhaps my favorite detail about the setting is how Bruce captures the emptiness of Rome. For a city famous for its crowd and grandeur, he strips it of people, reducing it to pure form: arches, pillars, sunlight. That stillness turns the environment into an extension of Tang's inner self. The city becomes an external reflection of his discipline, silent, timeless, unshaken. By the time the film ends, the setting has transformed from foreign ground into sacred ground. Rome, once a symbol of Western dominance, now feels universal, a place where two philosophies meet and reconcile through understanding. It's not conquered, it's harmonized. And that's what gives the film its quiet power, the realization that the world's most ancient ruins can host the birth of something new. Every brick, every shadow, every gust of wind in the way of the dragon carries intention. The setting isn't background, it's character. And in Bruce Lee's hands, even the stones of Rome seem to whisper the same lesson Tang Lung lives by. That true strength isn't about possession, but harmony. Not about the land you stand on, but the balance you bring to it. The stories that unfolded behind the camera are almost as fascinating as what we see on screen, because they reveal Bruce Lee not only as a director, but as a visionary obsessed with truth. Every decision he made, every delay, every argument, every unplanned reshoot, was driven by a refusal to compromise authenticity. His perfectionism was both his gift and his burden, and The Way of the Dragon stands as the purest record of that uncompromising spirit. One of the most powerful behind-the-scenes truths is how personal this project was for Bruce. After years of frustration in Hollywood, where he was told Asian actors could only play sidekicks or villains, he decided to take complete control. Golden Harvest, his home studio in Hong Kong, gave him a chance, but even they didn't fully grasp the scale of what he intended. He wasn't just directing a movie. He was proving that an Asian filmmaker could lead, command, and redefine global cinema. His drive was so intense that crew members often said it felt like working inside the eye of a storm, chaotic, focused, unstoppable. During the shoot, Bruce's energy was legendary. He would arrive early, often before dawn, to test camera angles and lighting setups himself. If something felt false, he would change it instantly. He taught the crew by demonstration, not instruction, showing rather than explaining. Actors and extras described him as calm until the camera rolled, at which point his presence filled the space. There are stories of Italian technicians who couldn't speak a word of Cantonese, breaking into applause after takes simply because they'd never seen such controlled physical expression before. The Colosseum sequence became the heart of this legend. The Italian authorities allowed limited access, so Bruce and the team filmed guerrilla style during public hours, dodging tourists and security. Those wide, establishing shots of Bruce standing among the ruins, shot illegally, using a small camera crew hiding among sightseers. Later, back in Hong Kong, Bruce recreated the arena from memory using local stone quarries and careful lighting to mimic the Roman sun. When he viewed the edited sequence, he reportedly said, "Now the dragon has spoken." It's extraordinary to realize that one of cinema's most iconic fights was built from both defiance and ingenuity. There's another moment that reveals the essence of his philosophy. During rehearsals, Bruce accidentally kicked Chuck Norris harder than intended. Instead of anger, Norris laughed, saying, "That's what makes it real." Bruce smiled and kept rolling. That trust, that shared pursuit of truth, defines why their duel feels so sincere. It wasn't about dominance. It was about perfection through mutual respect. The humor on set also deserves its place in history. Bruce's natural charisma kept morale high despite long hours and minimal comfort. Between takes, he would tell jokes, mimic accents, and even break into impromptu dance routines to lighten the mood. The Italian extras adored him, calling him Il Piccolo Diavolo, the little devil, for his speed and unpredictability. But even in laughter, he was teaching discipline. He often said, "Flow with it, but never lose your center," a principle that guided both his martial art and his directing. Yet behind that warmth was a man carrying immense pressure. Friends recall that Bruce barely slept during production. He wrote revisions to the script late at night, sometimes on napkins, driven by the need to refine emotional beats. He demanded authenticity from his actors because he demanded it from himself. When an assistant once suggested using a stuntman for a minor fall, Bruce shook his head and said, "It isn't my body, it isn't my truth." That kind of commitment defined his artistry, and perhaps foreshadowed the toll it would take. There's a poignant anecdote about the film's final day of shooting. After completing the Coliseum scene, Bruce reportedly stood in silence for a long time, looking around the empty set. Then, with his hands behind his back, he said softly, "It's finished." Crew members said it felt like he wasn't talking about the movie, but about a chapter of his life. He had built something that transcended genre, language, and expectation, and in doing so, he had found closure. Financially, the film's success stunned everyone. Released in Hong Kong, it broke records within weeks, and international distributors scrambled to secure rights. Bruce's instinct had been right. The world was ready to see martial arts not as pulp, but as poetry. He personally oversaw the editing of foreign versions, adjusting pacing and subtitle phrasing to preserve his intended rhythm. Even in post-production, he refused to let anyone dilute the film's integrity. And yet, amid triumph, there was exhaustion. Those close to him noticed he seemed both exhilarated and distant, as though he had poured everything out. Some recalled how, during the wrap celebration, he raised a glass and said, "Now I can rest." It's haunting, knowing that less than a year later, he would be gone. But perhaps that's why The Way of the Dragon feels so complete. It carries the weight of an artist who knew he was racing against time. One more hidden layer makes the story even more remarkable. Bruce's wife, Linda, later revealed that he often spoke of the movie as a conversation with the West. He wanted to show that cooperation was possible, that beauty could emerge from difference. Behind the camera, he lived that belief daily, building friendships across language and culture, turning chaos into harmony. So when I watch the film now, I can almost see him behind every frame. His hands guiding the lens, his voice shaping the rhythm, his laughter echoing between takes. The movie is alive with his presence because he gave it everything he was. Every bruise, every improvised shot, every moment of silence on that set became a thread in the tapestry of his legend. The Way of the Dragon isn't merely the result of behind-the-scenes craftsmanship. It's a testament of a man trying to translate his soul into cinema. And though the cameras have long stopped rolling, the energy he unleashed there, the conviction, the humility, the restless pursuit of truth, still reverberates through every director who believes that movies can be both art and awakening. When you peel back the layers of this film's meaning, what you find are symbols, quietly embedded, often invisible to casual viewers, yet resonating with enormous force once noticed. Everything Bruce Lee created here operates on two planes at once. The literal, a man fighting for justice, and the metaphoric, a culture asserting its dignity, an artist expressing his philosophy through action. The movie breathes like a poem of motion and reflection, where every strike and pause carries its own moral code. The central symbol, of course, is the dragon itself, not a mythical creature breathing fire, but a living metaphor for transformation. In Chinese philosophy, the dragon represents strength through wisdom, power that harmonizes rather than destroys. Tang Lung embodies this perfectly. His journey from confusion to mastery mirrors the dragon's evolution, from wandering serpent to celestial guardian. The title isn't about learning how to fight. It's about learning the way, the path of moral discipline, humility, and flow. Bruce Lee turns a dragon into a state of mind, a metaphor for self-realization that burns away fear and ignorance. The Colosseum, where the final duel unfolds, is another symbol, one that transcends geography. Historically, it's a monument to domination and spectacle, where violence entertained empires. By placing Tang Lung there, Bruce reverses history. A Chinese man once invisible in Western narratives now stands in the epicenter of Western might and redefines combat as art. The empty arena becomes a stage for redemption. The silence between punches speaks louder than war drums ever could. It's a moment where philosophy conquers history, where grace replaces glory. Even Tang's nunchaku, spinning with impossible precision, carry symbolic weight. They represent unity between opposites, flexibility and control, offense and defense, chaos and balance. When Tang wields them, he isn't showing off technique, he's manifesting philosophy. The motion of the nunchaku reflects the flow of life, constant, rhythmic, dangerous if mishandled, beautiful when mastered. Each rotation is a meditation on duality, how strength can be gentle and gentleness can be strong. The restaurant setting, too, becomes a recurring metaphor. It's small, warm, human, everything the gangster's sterile offices are not. It symbolizes community, home, and shared identity. When Tang defends it, he isn't protecting property. He's protecting belonging. The dishes that break, the chairs that fall, the laughter that returns afterward, all of it speaks of life's fragile but unbreakable resilience. It's as if Bruce Lee were saying, the soul of the people may be threatened, but it can never be erased. Cultural symbolism runs even deeper. Throughout the film, food operates as an emblem of misunderstanding and reconciliation. Early scenes where Tang struggles to order an Italian play as comedy, but they carry a gentle truth. Language divides until empathy bridges it. Later, when the workers share meals, food becomes communion, a bridge across cultures. Bruce knew that small gestures often heal larger wounds. Tang Lung's costume, a simple undershirt, loose pants, and sandals, contrasts sharply with the suits and sunglasses of the mobsters. It's a statement against pretension. His simplicity embodies authenticity. Theirs exposes emptiness. When he enters a Colosseum shirtless, it's not exhibitionism, it's symbolic shedding. He strips away illusion, confronting the world as pure spirit in human form. No armor, no mask, no facade. Just truth, muscle, breath, and will. Even humor functions symbolically. The early comedic tone isn't random, it's intentional disarmament. By making the audience laugh, Bruce lowers their defenses, preparing them for introspection. The laughter dissolves into awe, mirroring Tang Lung's own evolution from awkward visitor to awakened master. It's a subtle reminder that enlightenment often begins in humility. The recurring motif of mirrors and reflections deepens this idea. In several scenes, glass surfaces or shiny utensils catch light, distorting faces. It's as though Bruce is hinting that identity is fluid. We are not one fixed image, but a shifting reflection shaped by how others see us, and by how we choose to see ourselves. By the film's end, Tang no longer reacts to misunderstanding. He transcends it. There's also a quiet spiritual rhythm running underneath everything, a Taoist heartbeat. Bruce Lee's own words resonate here. Be like water. Tang Lung becomes water, soft yet unstoppable, adapting to every vessel, every form. The film's structure even mirrors this idea. It flows from comedy to action, from confusion to stillness, without abrupt cuts in spirit. The narrative itself moves like water. One of the most beautiful symbolic gestures comes in the aftermath of the final fight. Tang covers Colt's body with his robe, a simple act that redefines victory. The robe, white and clean, becomes a shroud of respect. In that single motion, violence is purified. Tang does not gloat or posture. He honors the fallen. It's an image of compassion triumphing over pride. Bruce Lee, through Tang, suggests that real mastery isn't about defeating others, but about transcending the need to. Even the wind carries meaning. In several key scenes, you hear it before you see movement. It whistles softly through Roman ruins, rustling Tang's clothes. It's nature's applause, an elemental witness to balance restored. The dragon, once metaphorical, becomes breath itself, life continuing, moving, transforming. Ultimately, every symbol in the way of the dragon converges toward a single truth, harmony through understanding. East and West, strength and humility, body and spirit. All opposites that seem irreconcilable at first, only to merge in stillness. Bruce Lee doesn't preach this truth. He embodies it. Through visual metaphor, silence, and motion, he crafts a film that teaches without teaching. When the final frame fades and Tang walks away into sunlight, the symbols complete their circle. The dragon has learned not to roar, but to breathe. The ruins of empire remain, but now they echo with new wisdom. The whisper of balance, the quiet of enlightenment, the calm after storm. In that silence, Bruce Lee leaves us the film's deepest symbol, a man walking alone, yet carrying the world's reconciliation within him. If you study The Way of the Dragon closely, you begin to see how Bruce Lee's filmmaking technique was an act of revolution disguised as elegance. He didn't just choreograph fights. He choreographed cinema itself. Every frame, every edit, every sound served an idea. He was inventing a new grammar movement, one that could speak both to the mind and the body. It's no exaggeration to say that this film reshaped how the world thought about rhythm, motion, and cinematic storytelling. Bruce Lee approached filmmaking with the same intensity he brought to martial arts. To him, both required the same discipline, absolute awareness of timing, flow, and emotional truth. He once said, "A good fight scene is not about showing techniques. It's about expressing oneself honestly." That belief guided his entire directorial style. His camera became an extension of the human spirit, not a mechanical observer. He framed bodies the way painters frame light, searching for energy, not symmetry. One of the most striking aspects of his technique is his use of silence. In a time when action movies drown themselves in soundtracks, Bruce stripped them bare. The Colosseum fight, for example, contains no music, just breath, footfalls, and the whisper of wind. That absence of score forces the audience into intimacy with motion. You hear the heartbeat of combat, not the distraction of spectacle. It's cinematic minimalism years ahead of its time, turning physicality into poetry. He also rejected Hollywood's rapid cutting style. Instead of masking weakness with editing, Bruce let the camera linger. He wanted the audience to witness skill in real time, to feel the danger of every punch. Long takes replaced flashy cuts, and wide angles replace close-up confusion. You see two entire bodies in motion, measured, precise, deliberate. The authenticity is hypnotic because it's real. Every frame declares, this is not illusion, this is mastery. Cinematographically, Bruce fused Eastern composition with Western perspective. He used symmetry when he wanted calm, and broke it when he wanted impact. His camera often moves with Tang Lung's breath, still during stillness, alive during chaos. That fusion of breathing and lens movement creates a meditative pulse. Even when the film explodes into violence, the viewer feels guided, not assaulted. He makes tension feel like meditation. Color plays a quiet but powerful role too. The earthy tones of Rome, the soft golds of sunlight, the muted palette of clothing, all conspire to highlight flesh in motion. When Tang Lung's bare torso catches light, it's not vanity, it's sculpture. Bruce uses a human body as his palette, contrasting its warmth against the cold marble of civilization. It's art direction as philosophy, man's natural grace outshining artificial power. His editing rhythms reveal a musician's ear. He cuts scenes not just visually but rhythmically, using pauses as beats. In interviews, Bruce often compared fighting to jazz, improvised, spontaneous, alive. You can feel that in the editing tempo. There's syncopation in the way tension builds, releases, then rebuilds. The film breathes like a living composition. Even the comedic scenes follow that rhythm. Slow setup, sharp punchline, smooth transition, like sparring with humor. Lighting, too, reflects philosophy. Bruce favored natural light whenever possible, letting imperfections enrich texture. Shadows were not to be hidden, but embraced. The deeper the shadow, the clearer the movement. During the night scenes, especially when Tang walks through narrow alleys, you can feel solitude in the interplay of light and darkness, a visual echo of yin and yang. It's not simply aesthetic. It's spiritual geometry. Thematically, even the camera angles carry meaning. Bruce avoids looking down on Tang Lung, literally and figuratively. When the Western villains appear, the camera tilts subtly upward toward them, framing them as imposing yet detached. But when Tang confronts them, the angles balance out. Equal footing, equal humanity. By the end, when he faces Colt, the camera no longer favors either side. The balance is complete. The technique itself mirrors a moral lesson, equality through understanding. At the box office, the film became an international phenomenon. Its success stunned distributors who had doubted that a Hong Kong-made production could appeal globally. Released first in Asia, it shattered records, then rolled across Europe and America, opening the world's eyes to the charisma of Bruce Lee and the depth of martial arts cinema. It earned millions on a fraction of Hollywood budgets, becoming one of the highest-grossing Asian films of its era. But beyond numbers, it marked a tectonic shift. It proved that cultural authenticity could sell without Western mediation. That success reshaped the global film industry. Hong Kong cinema suddenly became exportable. The martial arts genre, once marginalized, found prestige. Directors in Japan, Korea, and even France began studying Bruce's framing and rhythm. Hollywood, too, learned from him, later adopting his choreography, style, and action editing from The Matrix to John Wick. The film's box office triumph was not an accident of novelty. It was the birth of a new cinematic language that audiences instinctively recognized as truth. Bruce's innovations didn't stop with movement or money. They extended the storytelling structure. The three-act rhythm of The Way of the Dragon feels unconventional but organic. The comedy of Act 1 builds empathy. The moral confrontation of Act 2 tests it. The silent duel of Act 3 transcends it. That structure became a template for countless future martial arts films. Even modern superhero movies unknowingly follow its emotional pacing. His direction also pioneered authenticity in performance. Unlike Western fight scenes of the time, which exaggerated motion, Bruce insisted on minimalism. He trained his actors to move efficiently, to show real fatigue, to sweat and breathe visibly. Every gasp on screen is genuine. He once said, "Don't act, just be." That principle, truth over performance, has influenced acting theory far beyond action cinema. And perhaps most profound of all is how the film feels handmade. There's no pretense of perfection, no glossy sheen. It carries fingerprints, mistakes, human edges. That's what gives it soul. Its imperfections don't weaken it. They make it alive. Watching it today, you can feel the pulse of a man who poured his philosophy, his rebellion, and his compassion into a camera. The Way of the Dragon remains one of cinema's most quietly radical technical achievements. It's not loud about its innovation, but its influence echoes everywhere, in framing and pacing, in how action films learn to breathe again. Through pure technique, Bruce Lee taught filmmakers something spiritual, that a camera, like a body, finds freedom not in speed or complexity, but in harmony. And that's why every movement, every edit, still feels like a lesson in how art and discipline can fuse into transcendence. What makes this film's cast and its reception so captivating is how deeply they reflect the world that Bruce Lee was trying to change. Every performer, every interview, every review, then and now, reveals layers of transformation. The transformation of cinema, of cross-cultural perception, and of Bruce himself from mortal actor to myth. The ensemble around him may seem small, but their presence builds an entire moral ecosystem. Nora Miao, as Cheung brings a quiet tenderness that softens the film's edges. Her restrained acting contrasts Bruce's physical precision, emotion meeting motion. She once recalled that Bruce would coach her between takes, telling her, "Don't play fear, play care." That advice captures the film's ethos. Even within chaos, empathy is the ultimate discipline. Miao's subtle grace turned what could have been a stock love interest into the moral heartbeat of the story. Then there's Chuck Norris, whose role as Colt became one of cinema's most iconic rivalries. Off-screen, their relationship was steeped in respect and philosophical debate. They trained together years before the film, and Bruce specifically requested him for part, knowing he needed an opponent who embodied a different school of thought. What audiences didn't realize at the time was how daring this casting was. An American karate champion standing opposite a Hong Kong-born philosopher fighter. This was a literal and symbolic collision of East and West, shot with sincerity rather than spectacle. Chuck Norris later described the shoot as exhausting and beautiful. Every move was a conversation. That description sums up the spiritual core of their duel. The supporting cast, often overlooked, also plays vital roles in grounding the film's realism. Robert Wall as a brutal thug, Hwang In-Shik as one of the hired fighters, and a group of restaurant workers each represent an aspect of moral testing. Fear, arrogance, redemption. These were not polished studio actors, but martial artists and local performers, handpicked for authenticity. Bruce wanted their awkwardness, their natural reactions, the way real people move when they're scared or exhilarated. It's why the ensemble feels alive rather than staged. Behind the camera, interviews with the crew tell stories of awe. Italian technicians spoke of Bruce as a conductor who orchestrated silence and movement with surgical precision. The cameraman remembered how he'd correct framing mid-fight without breaking rhythm, almost dancing with the camera operator. Joseph Koo, the composer, said Bruce directed the music with the same rigor as the fights. He told me, if sound moves faster than feeling, it's noise. That statement alone encapsulates Bruce's artistry. Audience reactions in 1972 were split along cultural lines. In Asia, the premiere was near reverential. Cinemas packed beyond capacity, crowds cheering at every punch as though reclaiming dignity on screen. In Europe, viewers were stunned by the physical grace of man they barely knew, though some Western critics initially dismissed it as pulp action. Yet, as word spread, the tone shifted. Magazines like Variety began to call Bruce Lee a filmmaker to watch, and European directors invited him to collaborate. Unfortunately, time ran out before those bridges could form. Interviews from that period reveal Bruce's growing self-awareness. In one Hong Kong radio conversation, he said quietly, "I'm not in competition with actors. I'm in dialogue with truth." When asked about his sudden stardom, he smiled, "I hope they see more than muscles." His humility in those moments, paired with the fire of his on-screen presence, made him both unreachable and profoundly human. What's even more moving is how the cast reflected on him after his death. Nora Miao spoke of how filming The Way of the Dragon felt like watching someone painting their own farewell without knowing it. Chuck Norris described Bruce as the most alive man I ever met, saying that fighting him felt like sparring with light itself. Their words now read like elegies, reminders that they sensed his transcendence even then. Modern interviews with martial arts icons, from Jet Li to Donnie Yen, trace their inspiration back to this film. Jet Li once said that watching Bruce cover Colt's body at the end taught me more about honor than any book. That single gesture became a cinematic parable for generations. Even Keanu Reeves cited it while training for John Wick, calling it the blueprint for moral violence. Critics, too, have reevaluated the film through a contemporary lens. Today, scholars see it not merely as an action milestone, but as an early example of global cinema. Bruce wasn't just representing Chinese identity. He was envisioning universal ethics through movement. Film theorists note how his editing style, particularly the slow zooms and circular framing, anticipated later art house sensibilities. In retrospectives, The Way of the Dragon is now discussed alongside Bergman and Kurosawa, its philosophy given the intellectual respect it always deserved. Audience reviews decades later echo something deeper than nostalgia. They speak of emotional clarity, of how the film makes them feel strong without teaching arrogance, brave without glorifying violence. Fans from every continent talk about the Colosseum scene as if it's personal scripture. "It taught me when to stop fighting," one wrote. That's the paradox Bruce created, an action film that makes people gentler. Perhaps the most poetic audience response came during a Rome anniversary screening years later. As the credits rolled, someone in the crowd whispered, "He came back home." In that moment, surrounded by applause echoing through the same city where the dragon first walked, you could feel the circle complete. The cast, the critics, the audiences, all became extensions of Bruce's art. Each saw something of themselves in his stillness, his humor, his compassion. And through them, his film achieved what every artist dreams of: immortality not through fame, but through reflection, living on in the minds and hearts of those who watch him move, and, for a brief moment, understood what harmony looks like in human form. There's always a hush that falls over me when I reach the end of this film, because its conclusion feels less like a finale and more like a farewell whispered in motion. After the dust of the Colosseum settles, After Tang Lung's quiet bow to his fallen opponent, the story returns to stillness. No trumpets, no triumph, just silence. And that silence holds more truth than 1,000 victories ever could. The way Bruce Lee ends his film is deliberate, spiritual, and deeply humane. Tang doesn't linger to celebrate. He doesn't bask in admiration or stand as a conqueror. Instead, he turns, walks through the ruins, and disappears into sunlight. That image, small figure against massive stone, is one of the most haunting and beautiful final shots in cinema. It says everything about who Bruce was, a man who fought to transcend ego, not defeat it. The dragon, having proven its way, dissolves back into horizon. There's a moral stillness to this ending. It doesn't demand applause. It invites reflection. You realize that Tang's journey was never about defeating enemies. It was about harmonizing opposites, honor with humility, courage with restraint, east with west. That's why his victory feels so peaceful. He's not escaping Rome. He's outgrowing it. The city, once strange and intimidating, has become familiar, conquered not by fists but by understanding. The final minutes also reveal Bruce's deeper philosophy about art and life. In the typical structure of an action film, the hero wins, the crowd cheers, and the credits roll in triumph. Here, the camera lingers instead on departure, on transition. The stillness between frames feels almost sacred, like meditation. Tang Lung has become a vessel of wisdom, no longer bound by conflict. You can sense that Bruce wanted audiences to leave not exhilarated but awakened, to feel the calm clarity that follows struggle, the peace earned through mastery. Even the film's last auditory moments carry meaning. The faint echo of whine through the ruins replaces music. That wind which accompanied so many of Bruce's movements now feels like breath, the breath of completion. Nature reclaims the silence that violence had interrupted. It's cinematic closure in its purest form. Life continuing as if nothing monumental had happened, though everything has changed. On a personal level, knowing what came after give these moments unbearable poignancy. Within a year of this film's release, Bruce Lee was gone. Watching that final walk now feels prophetic, as if he sensed the transience of everything. Fame, flesh, form. The dragon's way, it seems, was not to stay but to move on. The Colosseum becomes a metaphor for mortality itself. Grand, echoing, filled with ghosts of those who fought before. And yet, amid all that decay, one man moves with light in his step, untarnished by the weight of history. The legacy that followed transformed this quiet ending into legend. In death, Bruce became what Tang was in life, a bridge between worlds. The film's message, once cultural, became universal. Martial artists studied it for technique, philosophers for meaning, filmmakers for rhythm. Even today, people revisit that ending and find new resonance. Some see it as spiritual ascension, others as artistic liberation, but all agree that it feels final, as though he had completed a journey larger than cinema itself. It's almost impossible to separate that final image from Bruce's real life, the young man who defied stereotypes, crossed continents, and built something eternal from muscle and thought. When he walks away, he isn't leaving Rome. He's leaving the old world behind, the world of limitation, prejudice, and misunderstanding, and stepping into immortality. The screen fades, but the idea remains. Strength refined into serenity, will transform into wisdom. And yet, beneath that cosmic sense of farewell, there's intimacy. You can feel Bruce talking directly to his audience, to every young person who's ever felt unseen or underestimated. His message isn't fight harder. It's know yourself, then the world will follow. That's what makes this ending so personal, so timeless. It's not a goodbye to cinema. It's an invitation to live with purpose. Over half a century later, the dragon's shadow still stretches across film, philosophy, and spirit. The techniques have been replicated, the stories reimagined, but that essence, that purity of movement and mind, remains unmatched. The last frames of The Way of the Dragon are a kind of cinematic prayer, that we may each find our own equilibrium, our own balance between power and peace. So as the light floods the screen and Tang Lung disappears, I always feel a soft ache, a sense that I've just watched not the end of a movie, but the crystallization of a man's life philosophy. He came to teach that mastery is not domination, that strength without compassion is weakness, and that the truest victory lies in walking away with grace. And that's where I'll leave it, my literature-loving friends, with the image of Bruce Lee, silent under the Roman sun, carrying in his stillness the wisdom of all his battles. If his fists spoke the language of motion, his footsteps at the end speak the language of peace. The dragon's way, after all, was never to conquer, but to enlighten. If you found beauty in that stillness, in the grace behind the fight, then stay with me. Like, subscribe, and walk beside us again next time as we journey into another masterpiece where art and spirit intertwine.